our talk, and I will pause and check if it records properly. So maybe maybe where are you right now, Phil?
I'm in Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh, okay, in Stockholm. Okay. Do you enjoy it?
I do enjoy it. I enjoy it enough that I'm upset about being asked to leave.
Yeah, I heard about it. I heard about it. It's really unfortunate. And
Very unfortunate, very untimely, and very arbitrary. It's terrible.
mhm,
But of course, I'm not alone in this. There are thousands like me who, just ordinary working people that just don't happen to be born in the right country or just don't have be
mhm,
of a particular favored race, color, or creed or whatever. So in the in the political situation, which is swinging back to God, it seems like it's swinging back to what Europe was and America too in the 30s or something, to the bad old days. So this is quite unfortunate.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully, it won't be as bad as in the 30s.
Of course.
Um, by the way, have you thought about moving to maybe some other European, especially European Union country, or
I have thought about this. I mean, I spent 10 years in Germany, for
yeah.
instance, where I lived, and I thought about returning there. Um, but with the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, even
Oh,
worse, then
mm-hmm,
it seemed like a retreat to America was being my only option.
mm-hmm,
I do have family there. Both my son and grandsons are game designers like
mm-hmm.
me, and so
Oh, you've got a
and they,
grandson. Congratulations.
yes, I have two grandsons, and they're busy growing up. So I've been the Swedish Social Democrats or the Swedish Democrats uh, forced me to take early retirement and forced me out of my home, forced me to leave my wife. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to return to Sweden, but
Mm-hmm,
the situation is really terrible.
mm-hmm,
Uh, it's bad enough that Russia is rattling its swords again. When I first came to Europe, I was told, hey, Europe is done with all this war foolishness. We've learned our lesson. Never again are we going to, you know, engage in these ludicrous aggressions and petty border disputes and killing civilians and bombing and stuff like that. We've had enough of this. Oh God. So
yeah, but it's a Russia who invaded
yes,
Ukraine,
it's
and
Russia who invaded. This is so. And all it takes is one madman, I guess, to upset the apple cart.
probably not a single man, because there are many imperial thinking, like people in behind the president of Russia Federation. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's not just a
I
single
certainly get
man.
a lot of that here, but let me ask, in
Hmm.
Poland, are you or your friends worried at all about um,
It's a great
aggression,
question.
invasion, of bombing?
On one hand, we are, we definitely are, because Poland was basically uh, under occupation of Russia occupation for many decades.
Of
Uh,
course.
uh, on one hand. On the other hand, uh, people are just trying to live, and they hope for the best. They hope for the best, and
Yeah,
our politicians are talking a lot. They are spending a lot of the money. The question is if they are creating some real, maybe not threat, defensive threat, in order to scare Russia to attack, or at least to think twice before they would try to attack Baltic countries. And one
I see.
of those is Poland.
Yeah.
Okay, Phil. So maybe we can start now, and also we will see how much it will take time. Okay, if you will become exhausted or something, then we can always stop, and maybe try to talk one more time, like in a week or two, or when you will have some free time. Okay.
All right.
Okay, so maybe let's I will open my questions. Uh,
Only the hard ones.
Start with the hard ones.
The hard ones, Marcin, you're
Oh.
handling the hard ones.
Okay, okay, but maybe not from the very beginning. So welcome to the Gentleman at the Table podcast. My name is Peter, and I will be your host today. And our today's guest will be a legend, a longtime designer, a half man, half institution, and an artist, Phil Eklund. So hello, Phil, and thanks for joining.
Hello, hello, gentlemen at the table,
Hello.
and
Mhm.
hello, Poland.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I would like to also thank Irek, Marcin Drzewko, and Lukas Sitko for preparing many of the probably most of those questions. So
I see.
before we will start, a couple of warm up, so-called warm up questions. I heard that you have Polish roots. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Oh, yes. Well, I do have a Polish grandfather, and I'm sorry that I'm conducting this interview in English and not in Polish, but he didn't teach me a single Polish word. But my grandfather, I'm looking at my family tree here just to remind myself of some of the particulars. Joseph Bolesław Studak II came to America, immigrated to America in 1904 at the age of 5. And his mother was Anna Luzatek, and father Joseph Studak I, printer and machinist. And my grandfather was a graphics designer. He did illustrating posters, advertising posters, and he actually worked in St. Louis with the cartoon legend Walt Disney. This is a
Oh,
family legend,
oh, that
and so and Mr. Disney has a pretty good reputation in our family history, and my grandfather did tell me stories about their meeting and the cartoons they drew together and things like this.
hmm, that
So yes, once again, I apologize that uh, my grandmother is German, and my grandfather is Polish, and I
do you know the city where he came from? Maybe
now I think I do, although I will be hard pressed to pronounce it.
you can spell it.
It looks like, according to this, he was born in Filik, which at that time was Austro-Hungary, but now I think is called Filikovo in Slovakia. And so that's what I know about
Okay.
his origins. But I did see when I was visiting Poland for a games convention, I saw the name Studak, which, by the way, I'll try to spell it. SZCZUREK. I saw this in a political poster. Someone with my family name was running for mayor or some such
Mm-hmm.
office in Gdansk. So I
Okay.
was interested. Of course, maybe this is a relative of mine, maybe not. But I haven't figured this out.
Okay. It's interesting because in 1904, the revolution which is called the Revolution of 1905, basically started. So it's interesting because it was tumultuous time at the moment in Poland.
I see. I
Okay.
see. Well, then this family, the Studak family, may have been refugees
Yeah, it might be
at
so.
this juncture.
Yeah. Okay. So another question is because you are mm, very popular, maybe even extremely popular designer in Poland, and Poland has a very turbulent history full of conflicts, unions, and fights for sovereignty. So, have you
Yes.
ever thought about creating Pax Polonica?
Yes. So others have voiced something like this. I'm not sure. Would this be a long-term time span? Because it could be trying to trace the history of this part of the world through many centuries would be possible. At least that's what I was considering. I'm trying to do. I mean, I read by James Michener. He has a book called Poland, and I read this when I was much younger, and it did spark my interest of this particular contentious land, which every power in Europe and Asia seemed all too willing to invade, and how the Polish people have built, their culture out of such borderlands would be a fascinating subject. It's the subject of many PAX games having these so-called buffer zones. They're
Mm-hmm.
called buffer zones, and Pax Pamir is a really good example of this. Although there are buffer zones, of course, in Pax Renaissance and like Switzerland is sort of an example of this, or Milan between Italy and France. So there are a lot of areas which and Afghanistan in Pax Pamir, a lot of areas which the two superpowers they border don't really want to invade because they may invite reprisals from the other superpower.
Mm-hmm.
So the buffer zones survive in a very uneasy peace, an uneasy peace. And the inhabitants of these buffer zones may benefit a little bit about not having some sort of sovereign overlord and balancing uh,
Mm-hmm.
the favors between the two superpowers involved, or three, or whatever it is. And but they could also just get ravaged in war, like Germany or Prussia did in the 30 Years' War, or Ukraine today.
Mm-hmm.
Just invaded for no reason other than the bombast of certain leaders. It's like Kaiser Wilhelm all over again in Belgium and Liechtenstein or something. So, any rate, yes, these sorts of buffer zone situations is a perfect environment for a PAX game,
Mm-hmm.
in which the players are not super overlords, they're not superpowers, they are the smaller war chiefs or intermediate leaders who are balancing favors between them, trying to gain advantages by balancing the superpowers against each other. And a, a Poland PAX game would, I sort of think, would be in this situation. I mean, of course, the most recent was World War II, and it was just a plaything between Germany and Soviet Union. But many, many earlier time periods, it could be. But again, I commend the spirit of Poland and its people for making itself, after being occupied for so long by various unfriendly overlords, that they have made themselves into a peaceful and productive land that once was, God, just a poverty-stricken hellhole. They've built themselves a land which is very attractive to
Yeah, yeah.
immigrants, to people like me who are looking for a home. Right now I'm in the market of finding a new place to live,
Mhm,
a new country to call my own, and Poland is pretty well up there in that list. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. We welcome you. And also talking about spirit, I would like to try to be your today. I would like to try to be your Christmas spirit, uh, peekaboo.
Now, is this like Charles Dickens' Christmas
Yeah,
spirit?
yeah. Something.
Present, past, and future Christmases?
Exactly,
I
exactly.
Well, this sounds interesting. Yeah, tell me more, Peter.
Okay, first I would like to take you, as you mentioned, on a journey through the past, present, and future. So the first question is, are you ready? And let's start with the past. So, do you remember how did Eklund's journey as a designer begin? What games did you play as a kid? Which games do you remember after all these years? As a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult, maybe.
All right. Well, I I remember I have three brothers,
Mhm,
and I'm the oldest of four boys, and we were all always playing board games. I was more inclined to these sorts of things in sports and stuff like this. And I remember a kind of a train game, not what you might call a train game today with stocks and bonds and stuff like that. It's just a very, very child like, roll the dice and move your train, uh, and make switches to go where you want it to go. And but even at this, I think I was only playing with my older the next older brother, Ken, who's 2 years younger than me, and I think even then we were kind of unsatisfied somehow. So we
Mm-hmm.
would put in our own little rules and stuff like this. And then when I got into seventh or eighth grade, in the now we're getting to the late 60s, I imagine, and there were some Milton Bradley games. There was a game called Dogfight, for instance, about airplanes maneuvering around, biplanes from the First World War maneuvering around. And again, I would get fascinated with biplanes, and I would delve deep dive into research on these things and make different planes and different characteristics. And now the game doesn't really resemble what came out of the box by this time. And but and I'll just mention my own son, who also my own son Matthew Eklund is a game designer. Now he's
Mm-hmm.
assistant attorney general of the state of Arizona in USA. But when he was growing up, he had a lot of the same characteristics I did. When he'd get interested in a topic, he would zero in and focus on it and do all the research possible on this particular situation, this particular time. I'll just show you. Uh, just here's Station Fall. This is
Yeah,
the latest
we played it
game from my son Matthew.
as well as Pax Transhumanity. So
Yes, Pax Transhumanity is another one of his creations that, and I was involved in the design of both of these. I know a lot about the evolution of these games. But at any rate, you asked me about my childhood, and this is when I was always fooling around with games, even though at some point I went to the university as an aerospace engineer, got a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering at University of Arizona, and during these times I was looking to become a rocket engineer like my dad was, and the but games were always a hobby that I was pursuing. I remember in aerospace class, the professor was talking about, rocket design, specific impulse of rockets and their performance in space. And at the time, I was playing games from Avalon Hill.
mm-hmm.
And for instance, they had a lot of games where you have little cardboard counters representing military forces of some sort. I remember, for instance, what was a game that has the tanks? Panzerblitz, yes, Panzerblitz. And so what struck me about these was that you have all these military forces, you maneuver them around on a map, and the chits, the little counters, had 3 numbers on them at the
Mm-hmm.
bottom and a picture of the tank or whatever, or they could be in the corners. But at any rate, they encapsulated important parameters in numbers that were on these, and you'd maneuver them and fire at other tanks and the like. And the numbers might be something like attack factor and defense factor or army or something and movement.
Mm-hmm.
So in this class, in this aerospace class, and the professor's droning on, I was just thinking, hey, well, if I made these little counters for a rocket game, well, what would these numbers signify? I mean, the attack factor is was not really so relevant in rocket travel, and
Mm-hmm.
although it could be,
Mm-hmm.
the rockets will have an energy source, a power supply, and this power supply is mainly for the drive, for the rocket drive, but it could be diverted for weaponry as well. So when I was trying to doodling in my notebook or whatever, I was trying to come up with parameters that would represent rocket performance in space. And this was the very first inspiration for the game that later became High Frontier. I could probably show you this. This is the fourth edition of High Frontier
For all.
right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one of my small box games, but it's my
Yeah,
most popular
definitely.
one. There were lots and lots of iterations because we're talking about a game that developed over something like 35 years or so,
Ooh, whoa.
3 decades. So, and so trying to recreate reality by rules and little components was a fascinating thing for me, and I enjoyed it a lot more than actually playing the game. And I would try to create a landscape whereby would behave like the real landscape of space would. And then I would try to figure out how players would react to this. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of a different way of looking at the solar system and the like. At the time, I was fortunate enough to I was volunteering, or I was working with some of the programmers for the Lunar Planetary Laboratories. And so I had access to things like the delta V maps of the solar system. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what a great find. This was practically a game just sitting, waiting to be done. If you've got a delta V, how much energy or how much change of velocity it takes to get from one place to another anywhere in the solar system, well, this is a gold mine. And it also um, making an energy map, essentially an energy subway map of the solar system, what makes you look at the solar system. This was Matthew, my son, always told me that now I see Mars and Venus and the asteroid belt in a whole different way, because before I was always just looking at distance, but now we're looking at the energy. And well, by the rocket equation, the delta V is directly derived from the specific impulse and the wet and dry mass. So all these became important terms in High Frontier for rocket performance. And in those early days, I would have just Xerox these games off for my friends. Xerox is a primitive machine for copying, and we'd put little pieces of plastic over it with grease pencils to mark where
Mm-hmm.
the rockets were going and the like. And later on, these all got refined over and over again to better simulations or easier simulations. So
More approachable. And
yes,
you have mentioned Avalon Hill, but
yes.
were there maybe other games that have left greatest mark on you as a designer? Uh, do you have any on mind?
Well, I have to think about it, but I mean, Pax Britannica, I really admired the um, the designer for this. He seemed to be, I can't think of his name at the moment, even though it's at the tip of my tongue. but he was thinking out of the box, and he had little footnotes in his games about how he came up with these designs and why he did the things he did. And I was very impressed by this format as well. That I really enjoyed seeing how the games were designed, how and why the
Mm-hmm.
simulation was done as it was, and so I tried to copy this sort of formats. I started writing essays in my games. I started putting little notes about the what was trying to recreate, because any game, even the most abstract ones, are some sort of recreation of reality, and as such, it's up to the game designer to try to figure out what are the important processes that are involved in this particular subject matter. What was significant? You try to put in what you absolutely have to put in to capture the essence of the time period or subject that you're doing, and leave out all the extraneous ones. And this is sort of the heart of the matter, how game designers good game designers try to recreate reality with their products.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very fond of copying other mechanisms or trying to get a mechanism with a new subject. What I prefer to do is deep dive into a subject, and then when I've looked at why things happened from there, or at least have a theory on why things happened, then I try to make up processes, mechanisms, what to recreate this. Not starting with a mechanism and then applying it to another time period or something. Uh, I I I much prefer making having the game itself come up with the mechanisms rather than mechanisms coming up with a game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's very interesting. And I will a little bit change the order of questions that I wanted to ask you, because uh, I would jump for a while to the BIOS series, and also High Frontier to some degree, um, because the question is, mm, are BIOS game, in your opinion, what do you think? Are BIOS games more of a simulation that generate a large amount of, let's call it randomness, mixed with player interactions, or are they a strategy games? What do you think about them?
Well, this is a
Because
difficult question.
Mhm,
Um, the BIOS series tries to minimize as the life develops. So BIOS series, it's a triad, a trilogy of games, starting with the first BIOS Genesis, which is about the origins of life and how
mhm,
it developed. And at the very end of this first game, you start getting multicellular creatures. So this is a game all about biochemistry, and you can imagine when uh, you have such a game where you're talking about biochemistry that's not yet evolutionary. It's just random. But if you do hit upon something that recreates itself, cellularizes itself, in some way controls entropy, and and comes up with some sort of template for reproduction. These are 4 qualities of life. And with is it possible even to consider something with only one of those 4 to even be alive? This is, but to have all 4 occur, such
Mm-hmm.
as all modern life has all 4 of those attributes. So the point I was trying to get to was that this first game in the BIOS series, BIOS Genesis, has a lot of ristage to it, a lot of random elements. It has die roll, and you have to play the odds. You have to your first attempts at life, maybe your first 10 attempts at life are perhaps doomed to fail, but you gain a little bit more organization each time until you finally get to the origins of life. So this is a game which is heavy on ristage. And I'm going through the same sort of design process on my game Arrival, which is my current project.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about a starship. It's in the High Frontier universe. It's about a starship that arrives at an alien planet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sequel to Interstellar. And where all the ristage comes in is that the starship arrives with almost no cargo, just practically you're dumping embryos onto a planet with TV nannies and hoping somehow that you'll get a civilization out of this. You've got the players are in AIs that are trying to create civilization. So, in a strange way, it's a lot like BIOS Genesis all over again. You have very strange and well, there's a whole bunch of planets. There's 6 basic planets and 4 climates for each. So we're talking 24 situations that you may be trying to create life in. And Genesis was only creating life in Haiti and Earth, a very first period
Mm-hmm.
of Earth's history. And they've just recently, as an aside, they just recently pushed back the Luca, the very first organism whose existence you can derive from DNA studies. They pushed back this organism to 4 billion years ago, which is right in the middle of the Hadean period, a period in which Earth was God, being pummeled by asteroids and had lava oceans. And it doesn't seem like it'd be a place where life could form. And when in Arrival, you also get dumped out on a planet that could have ice 7 oceans and brimstone falling from the sky and all these sorts of things where you're struggling to get started and then struggling against the other players who are also AIs, artificial intelligence, with different ideas on what the planet should look like, what an ideal colony should look like, how the natives, if there are any, should be treated. So I'm gone a little bit full circle on that. So I'm still having a very random experience at the very beginning of the game, but you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to, in a non-random way, the players are supposed to tame the planet, both in BIOS Genesis and in Arrival, through various processes to smooth out all the temperature fluctuations and storms of acid and hypercane whirlpools and the like that can really mess up the environment. So once you have it tamed, then it's a lot less random or essentially no random.
Mm-hmm.
Now the other games in the BIOS series use
Yeah,
much different
megafauna
mechanisms
origins.
than the first one in the series. The next one which is bios mesofauna, bios megafauna, and I'll soon. I've been asked by my employer, Ion Game Design, to come up with a unified bios series, which combines mesofauna and megafauna with climate and the like. But these were designed with not so much randomness. There's no dice in it. There is, it's much more like chess. You're trying to develop your macroscopic animals, either proto dinosaurs, proto mammals, and the like, to become the dominant terrestrial species on the planet Earth. And you do so through a market mechanism like similar to what's used in the PAX games, of trying to compete for the best adaptations
Mm-hmm.
with the other players, and trying to see from the geography and the characteristics of your opponents who will survive, who will become the top carnivore, the top herbivore, and how this will play out. Uh, and so this particular recreation of reality is not so random by the time you get to this period.
Mm-hmm.
You do have in the advanced game events which
Yeah, exactly. Those
are,
events are quite powerful, and
and they are pretty powerful. I have a vision. My understanding of the history of Earth is that natural forces are a lot greater magnitude in their effects on life than life itself has effects on life. So I call this the Octobahn, from the German word for a roller
mm-hmm.
coaster. So when you play a game of mesofauna and megafauna with the events, these events are card driven, and the idea is that these events are powerful enough, as you already know, that you fear them, you have to survive them much more than you
Mm-hmm.
do a competition from the other players. So it's the Octobahn, where all the players are just trying to hang on as the roller coaster takes them around. So these are card driven, and this is a random element. It's not. It's only in the advanced game, and again, you have to try to make yourself survivable, just like an arrival, just like in biogenesis,
Mm-hmm.
from anything that nature can throw at you. This is the this is the idea. And Bios Origins, the last of the trilogy, is about the how life became conscious, how it became have civilizations, cities, and technology and knowledge and stuff like this. The what we learned in history, and so this is perhaps my greatest creations. It's the ones I'm most proud of, and it's also perhaps the hardest ones to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping a rival will be in this uh, same sort of simulation as BIOS Origins is.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope I answered your question, Peter, about the amount of randomness in a game. In all my creations, I want the simulation value to, and
Mm-hmm.
the storytelling experience, and the simulation to be the dominant driver of
Mm-hmm.
of both the design and the play.
Okay. Okay, I get it. But maybe let's move get back a little bit to the past, and let's talk a little bit about the series, which is, in my opinion, much less random and much more strategic, and I'm talking about PAX series. Okay, so let's talk about them a little bit. Um,
Sure.
so from what I know, Pax Porfiriana, the first one, was created based on your older design, which is called Lords of Sierra Madre. Um,
Correct.
and could you tell us a little bit about the original game, as well as how it was reworked and eventually became Pax Porfiriana?
Yes, I can say something about this. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. It's only um, about 120 kilometers from the US-Mexico border. And so I took many trips to Mexico, and my son accompanied me on many of these trips as well. Matthew and I went along. And some of them did not go well. Uh, in Pax Porfiriana, I retell a little story about the aquaculture facility that was started by my professor at from U of A, and who I volunteered. I volunteered at this facility in Sonora, Mexico, on the coast, feeding the shrimp and things like this. It was a way, it was a clever way to get fresh water, because at the time Puerto Penasco, Sonora didn't have any sources of fresh water. The all its water had to be trucked in at pretty high
Mm-hmm.
expense, and this really limited its potential as a tourist town.
Mm-hmm.
The expense of the water, the bottled water. So this experimental facility to produce both fresh water and an aquaculture for shrimp farming
Mm-hmm.
combination seemed pretty great idea, and it was working fine. But then Mexican politics stepped in, and one day the federales showed up. Armed federales showed up and kicked out all the Americans, and the facility was nationalized. Uh, Millions and millions of dollars from investors in this facility were lost, and the facility itself went downhill fast. When Matthew and I visited it only a few years later, um, maybe 5 years later, I was volunteering at the facility when I was a college student, and Matthew, oh God, it has to have been like 7 years later, because Matthew was like 5 or something. Any rate, the place was deserted. The guard let us in, and it was rusted out. All the tanks were gone. So I got a real seat of the pants, and so did my professor, who who lost his dream as well. Got a real 2x4 lesson in Mexican politics, and this sort of was the genesis behind Pax Porfiriana. Now, I had been doing, even before that, a bunch of Lords games, as you mentioned, Lords of Sierra Madre, Lords of the
Mm-hmm.
Renaissance. These both became Paxified later. And they were hex games, and they were very intense to play. I mean, it was like each hex was 10 miles, and there was movement rates and counters and things like this. And the idea of calling it Lords was that, once again, I mentioned this earlier in the buffer zone. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if this conversation got recorded or not, but in the buffer zone conversation about possible future PAX games set in Poland or wherever is that the Mexico was something of a warlord economy where you had the rich, they were hacendados, rich landowners that protected the populace from bandits, but also fleeced them mercilessly with taxes and paternalism. Uh, I'll take care of all your needs, just do what I want, sort of thing. This is sort of a clannish thing. And so I try to recreate this sort of warlord system in the Lord's games. And the idea was not only to try to simulate players as rather small bands of warlords, but also to come up with a non-war game, at least non-exclusively war game
Mm-hmm.
simulation where all kinds of activities were possible, among them trading with superpowers, trading among yourselves, trying to develop things, trying to invest in things like ranches and haciendas and mines and smelters and modernization. So, Lords of the Sierra Madre, where Sierra Madre Games got its name, is sort of a lesson in modernization, a painful process of trying to get into the modern era of where merchants rule rather than warlords, and Renaissance was in the same vein.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the um, this is the uh, vision behind these PAX games. And I'll mention a little bit that I'm in love with hexes and these
Mm-hmm.
counters and all this intensity and stuff like this. But others, such as my son Matthew, who
Mm-hmm.
came up with the name for the PAX series, and also James Goot, one of my colleagues um, who went to school with Matthew, they emphasize, well, the wave of the future is these German games, these Euro games that are coming in, and they are card games. You don't need maps. I said, no maps. This is sacrilege. And I really resisted this idea for a long time, but they championed it, God, for years, really, until I finally broke down from my conservatism and said, "Okay, I'll try a version of Lord's Games. We'll call it PAX, like Matthew wants, and we'll call it Pax Porfiriana, and it'll all be about toppling the dictator and various. There'll be regimes in it. At first, there was only two regimes, but I insisted it be spread to four. So that's kind of how the the PAX series came around.
Okay, and as you have mentioned, you love hex encounters games, and also those maybe smaller, maybe a little bit easier to play games are much more popular. Uh, but deep inside in
At
your heart.
least less real estate. I mean, a
Hmm.
huge map that takes up the whole table. I mean, I love maps, but uh, especially with the idea of small box games that you could take
Hmm.
anywhere. And as you know, Pax Porfiriana originally came in a pretty small box, like
Yeah, like two or three packages of.
yeah. Here's a Greenland game, for instance.
Of cigarettes. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
this is this is actually probably twice as large, or at least twice as deep as the small box original Pax Porfiriana,
Yeah, the
which
original one. But my question is, uh, if you have full freedom to create any game in any version that you want, would you try to create some kind of this hex and counter game? Would it be a so-called monster game, or maybe you would like to stick to those more abstract, like Pax Porfiriana, Pax Renaissance games, which try to encapsulate? You have mentioned this word, encapsulate
yeah,
more things in a smaller, simpler actions.
I see. Well, I I'm not sure that I mentioned it when I was growing up in these games that I really loved tactical games. Like that dogfight game with the
Mm-hmm.
airplanes. Each counter was a single, plane flying around, and this was kind of an innovation. Panzerblitz had single tanks, or maybe small groups of tanks. But as I grew older, I began getting more and more interested in big pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And big
Mm-hmm.
pictures are things in history that were significant drivers of history. Things like the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, the emancipation of slavery. These were really momentous events in history, much more than some power mad dictator gaining temporary control over France or Poland, and only you know within his lifetime being kicked out again by staunch patriots and freedom fighters. This sort of exercise in territorialism seems pretty ignoble, I would say. It's not whether or not you are playing the freedom fighters or playing the power mad Napoleon who's taking you over. It just doesn't seem that worthy a topic for a game. Although freedom is very important. I don't get me wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
as some of these grand events that drive history and modernize the world and progress civilization. So these sorts of things, this sort of vision, as I understood more about politics and the way the world works and the like, drove me to more and more strategic level ideas that would be able to get these significant phases of history, like the Renaissance is a great example. I love the Renaissance, and I think it's one of the most important periods in history, really. And so to do this, I had to get away from detailed counters, detailed hexes, and things like this. So, Lords of the Renaissance, some people really swear by this, but it game significantly bogged down at the end because you kept track of so many units. And so I thought in order to capture the essence of the Renaissance, I would have to divide it into 10 kingdoms, all of which were struggling in their own way into modern times, such as Poland and
Mm-hmm.
Lithuania, Poland.
Hungary.
um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and So that's what I concluded. I hope I answered your question, Peter.
Yeah. Uh, and one more question about origins of PAX series. You mentioned that those so called buffer countries or maybe areas, because in many cases it's not a single country,
Yes.
are great places to place a PAX game. Um, and my question is. Uh, and also, you have mentioned about the name that your son Matthew has suggested, uh, but
Yes.
but also the question is why PAX? Because it sounds like a peace, but it hides conflict. What does it mean in context of those games?
In the
This
context
PAX.
of the games, first of all, my son came up with this name, and he said, "PAX, we don't want to identify ourselves with war games. We don't
Okay.
want this to be a war game." Pax means peace, of course, in Latin, and and so another element that was involved was the fact that a lot of these games, the PAX series games, begin in peacetime and lead up to a conflict, unlike war games where you start with a conflict and try for peace. And so there was a period in history called Pax Porfiriana. And this means the peace of the dictator Porfirio Diaz of Mexico. And he ruled with an iron hand, but and he was a very effective leader, I would say, even productive. He invited foreign investment, and he was well on his way to making Mexico into a, I don't know, benevolent dictatorship or maybe non-benevolent dictatorship. And something that many lands have tried to emulate. They look at the success of the West. They look at the success of Italy, for instance, during the Renaissance, um, when it became so rich despite not having any military power at all. The same with places.
Oh, hello. Oh, just give me a second. Can you hear me? Marcin, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Oh,
you
okay.
both loud and clear.
Okay,
You
so
hear me? All
oh,
right.
uh, is Phil back again? Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I lost you
It
for a
was
second.
I heard everyone, so I all hiccup.
Okay.
All right, Peter. I hope um I'm not sure what part of my little speech you heard or didn't hear.
I heard about an Italy that it become rich, even though it did not.
Yes,
Mhm.
I'm talking about periods, empires, or maybe I call them city states of merchants, which became rich and powerful despite having no military power. Sparta and the Carthaginians were like this. So was places like the Netherlands and England, and uh, they were able to, without having resources, but through the power of their merchants had enough say that they could become rich on their own.
Mhm.
And that richness eventually drove the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution and many other things. So these were periods whereby it wasn't the emperors, the Caesars, and the warlords. Well, I should mention the Roman Empire began as a republic, and this is when it had all its greatest advances as a republic. After the Caesars took over, it went into a decline. Uh, Byzantium is another example of where the power of trade and mercantilism was enough to perpetuate it for 1,000 years. So the Pax name was supposed to sort of emphasize that it's trade and the merchants who are creating power and prosperity for a region and not the imperial ambitions of particularly effective um, dictators or the like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm not sure if I made my point, but this is sort of the idea behind naming them the PAX series.
PAX
And
games.
Matthew, my son, was really insistent. He says, we're going to have a lot of these. We'll name them all PAX. And so it'll be like a series. And I said, oh, Matthew, this will never work. I mean, PAX? What are we even going to name these things? But my latest game, which is just now hitting the shelves, is Pax Hispanica. And this
Mm-hmm.
is from a historical period called Hispanica, one of the rare times that.
Could you wait a second because it seems that I encountered some more.
In Poland, we used to say to such situations, wait, how did it translate? List of inanimate things?
Yeah, yeah.
Inanimate things, yeah.
Yes, yes. In other words,
Okay.
machines are out to get you.
Yeah,
Yes.
they are taking control. Okay, I hope it will be better right now. Okay, so
All right.
basically, Matthew has become a visionary and also a contributor to the PAX series. One,
Oh yeah, he launched it pretty much.
I really like PAX Transhumanity as well. Basically,
Yes.
Renaissance Transhumanity and Pamir are my top, as well as Porfiriana are my top PAX games. I haven't played Hispanica yet. I have to do it. Oh, I also played some Emancipation, although I prefer those competitive games. But I
Yeah.
also played like a couple of.
Marcin was a chief playtester for Pax Hispanica.
Yeah, I heard that Marcin as well as
Oh,
Lucas.
all blame is for me, right? On me.
Well, yes. You, Marcin, were the most piratical, backstabbing, out to get you pirate in the whole Caribbean, as far as I'm concerned. Usually, when I played a game with you, there wasn't anything left of the Caribbean except maybe a few smoldering colonies and
I love it.
some refugees hiding in the hills in terror and rebellion and destruction everywhere.
I thought that Marcin as well as Lucas gave you a hard time as playtesters, but I didn't know that they also
Yeah.
hurt you on the map as well.
Well, Marcin certainly showed me how, as bad as the Caribbean turned out, it could have been worse.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad I haven't lived in those, times.
I'll just mention for
Better for
Pax
history.
Hispanica that, yeah, it's set in the 17th century and
Mhm.
it's once again, has a vision for trying to put into the player's hands the ability to determine how the Caribbean would turn out. Would it be a superpower? Would it be like Pablo Escobar's Colombia, a whole place in anarchy under a big drug lord godfather sort? I mean, all these futures for the Caribbean are possible. And the Martian showed us how not to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, but I would like to get back a little bit to Pax Renaissance. I know that you mainly focus on the theme on the both political as well as historic situation, which you'd like to somehow model in your games. But
Exactly.
I would like to ask you a little bit about mechanics in Pax Renaissance, um, because Renaissance is a much more mechanically complex game than Porfiriana. And the first question is, where did you get the ideas for all those subsequent mechanics? I mean, mechanics like religious wars, like siege operation, like Strawman, basically mechanic, which also appeared in Porfiriana to some degree,
Yeah.
like vote operations, like bishops, and their influence on the game state. Um, where did you both get the ideas, as well as how did you found how did you find mechanics which will model those things in Pax Renaissance?
I'll try to remember the best I can. The most important mechanic, though, which you didn't really mention,
Mm-hmm.
is the market. And the market was basically Matthew's idea, my son's idea. He originally we had, like most games, the cards were introduced to players face down. So you had a hand of cards that you started with or whatever that was random. And Matthew said that there would be a lot more player interaction if we had a system whereby the players could see the cards in a market. And these cards would get progressively cheaper as time goes on, which gave the strategic advantage that you could see the cards coming up
Mm-hmm.
and start strategizing. Well, if I had this card, what could I do? If my opponent had this card, what could they do? How valuable is this card? Right now, it's deep in the market, so it's way too expensive for me. But at some point, it's going to become cheap, and I want to be sure and get it before my opponent does. At what price should I go for? So this was a way to put an auction, more or less an auction, into the game without having any of the
Mm-hmm.
uh, time problems that auctions do. Auctions take up an awful lot of game time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And so this puts you in competition with other players, but in a way that did it so that you could be playing the game even when it's not your turn, because you're trying to see what your opponent's getting, what he wants, what he's building, and try to anticipate um, which cards he will go for. So this mechanism really launched the PAX series, I would say. The market, I've used Matthew's market over and over in many games. it has a disadvantage that there's no concealed hand. Everything's open, and if
Yeah.
you once it's in your hand, if your opponent has a good memory, he knows exactly what you got. Another thing that Matthew and I experimented with was, well, what kind of matrix should the market be? Originally, it was just one row, but having it 2 rows seemed to work much better. And so, I mean, we went to more rows, but a 2-row market where the very first column was the cheapest. Usually, you didn't have to pay anything for the first ones. And you had to have some mechanism to periodically flush the market. But at any rate, that's the market. You asked about other mechanisms in the game, and one of the fundamental dichotomies in all the PAX series is a maker versus taker division. In other words, you have a transactions between players which is mutually beneficial, such as trade or marriage or many other mutually beneficial transactions, or it could be one of these force-driven transactions where one player robs, steals taxes, or murders the other player. And this is transferring values, whereas a mutually beneficial adds values to the game. So the maker versus taker, we usually try to come up with one mechanism for all the voluntary transactions and another mechanism for all the involuntary ones, and try to standardize those to allow for streamlining of rules and so that you can figure out how to do these things pretty easily. In BIOS Origins, we had these same sorts of things, although I have to say, in BIOS Origins, we also experimented with a third type of transaction, a manipulation. For instance, proselytizing. If you have a religious cult trying to take over the world or something, this is something where I would define manipulation as playing on people's emotions rather than their reason. Usually if you're in business or whatever, your business transactions, you're trying to use reason. This is why our product is better. This is why you will save money. This is why you will have a better experience or better time. Whereas many other transactions are playing on your emotions somehow, including fraudulent ones. But you also asked about victim award and strawman actions. And
yeah, it's also
the
very
way,
interesting mechanic, and also one of the most original ones, where you can
yes,
hurt
the
yourself in order to achieve some greater value.
yes, yes. If you don't know what Peter's talking about, it's called a straw man action, and you have to imagine yourself in Mexico as, some supreme slaving evil overlord who is basically defrauding the public or just outright enslaving them. But this slaver overlord is seeing the progression of civilization and is seeing that his days are numbered as a slaver, and he wants to get in on the revolution. So he basically installs his slave plantations, his slave ranches, and slave mines, some sort of patsy, some sort of partner, and then hires or joins revolutionary forces to overthrow his own patsy, to destroy his own mine, and thus install himself as a great revolutionary liberator of the people and cover up the fact that he's the one who enslaved them in the first place. And this is called a straw man play, attacking yourself to give you prestige in a certain regime. And this came about because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the conversation, we had a dictator who had been in power for 35 years in Mexico who had to be overthrown. And there are different ways to overthrow. Do you cozy up to him and become his successor? So you're just another iron hand? Or do you have some sort of anarchist revolution to overthrow him? Or do you have a neighboring superpower come in to intervene in Mexico, namely US intervention? Or do you have a local uprising to liberate yourself from the clutches of this? So the idea was we came up with various regimes, and if you had enough influence in the regime that actually toppled Porfirio Diaz, then you would win the game. This would be a game-ending mechanism. And it was a little bit anti-Euro game because there wasn't any victory points involved.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about setting up the overthrow of the dictator and being in the proper regime, and having the most prestige in this regime in order to be declared the next dictator of Mexico. So, because you had these regimes and you had prestige in these regimes, I remember that I came up with the idea of a straw man, first of all, victim award. Victim award means that supposing you have your opponent, he's growing rich on mining or ranching or something, and you send banditos off, you hire banditos to go trash him, and now he's not a threat anymore. My idea was, yes, you trashed him, but the victim gains a certain amount of prestige in the opposite effect. Now he becomes powerful in a way, even though he's not making any money anymore, powerful in a way just because he becomes a natural revolutionary leader, saying, well, things are getting out of hand. Uh, so you attack him, you steal his money, you take his women, but he gets prestige as a
Mm-hmm.
victim. And so this is what's called victim award. And from this, it became apparent that players, I think it was unexpected that some players were saying, well, I don't care about money anymore. I just want to win the game and I need prestige to win the game. So I want somebody to attack me. So I become a revolutionary. Why don't I just attack myself
Mm-hmm.
and gain this? Uh, so I had the idea of a victim award. And I think some playtester who's, I don't recall the circumstances, either asked about it or rules lawyered it somehow to
Mm-hmm.
or negotiated with with an opponent. I don't remember the circumstances. Negotiate with an opponent saying, "Here, attack me. I want you to attack me. I
Mm-hmm.
want you to destroy me." because it's a way to victory. So that was kind of how the so-called straw man play came around. Now, trying to give it a name was very hard, and it's still not very obvious that this is a good name. It's so innovative that there really wasn't any names for it, at least none that I could think of. And somehow straw man was the one that stuck, although it was not a particularly inspired thing, but the idea is that you build up something that's easily toppled to say, look how great I am, knocking over all these villains that I myself installed. But still, I knocked them down. So it's
Yeah, I
sort of a straw man coming from,
I
you
I
know,
I
Little
will.
Red Riding Hood, or the Three Little Pigs, rather, of the House of Straw and Brick and Mud alike.
Yeah, I was asking about those mechanics, actually in Renaissance, but also in Porfiriana, because um, I'm curious because all those mechanics, like a strawman mechanic, like even market, because there were markets in other board games as well. But you also provided a lot of innovations, like for example in Porfiriana, you can you can mark a card. It's called speculation, and every time when some other player will buy it, will have to pay you the money for such a card. In Renaissance, you have to put those put gold on previous cards in the market. Those cards that
Yes.
are yeah that are cheaper. Um, but also getting back a little bit to those other earlier mentioned mechanics, like religious wars, like siege operations, votes, bishops, and so on. Mm, for me, they are.
Well, I'll mention a couple of. First of all, speculation
Mhm,
was Matthew's brainstorm. We desperately needed a cheap operation. There were only 3 actions allowed, and usually a lot of the significant ones took 2 actions, and you'd have an action left over. We desperately needed something
mhm,
to take up these actions, and Matthew came up with the idea of speculation. Now, the original Lord's game that Lords of Sierra Madre that Pax Porfiriana came from had a calendar mechanism in it. And this was the idea that you had a timeline, and if you wanted to build something like a ranch
mhm,
or a mine, perhaps, then you counted a certain number of steps into the future on this timeline. And the timeline was big enough to hold a card, a bridge-sized card. So you'd place your card like
mhm,
9 years in the future, and this smelter or mine took 9 years to build, and every advance on the turn, you'd have to pay, I think it was 1 gold for until it was built. So you had to figure out, this is a very typical investment problem. You had to figure out, well, is it going to be worth it? I'm going to be spending money for 9 years before I see a single profit. Will the game last that long? Will I just be spending too much money? And until this investment comes up, and there could be things to prolong the investment. But this mechanism of advancing the cube and paying off one at a time was sort of the um, was first of all was a mechanism that I perhaps most regretted throwing away when I went to
mhm.
um,
It sounds really interesting.
yeah, I mean, we have only simplified versions of it in the game, but it was also kind of the inspiration for Matthew to have the speculation action in the game.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Okay, why am I asking about those mechanics? Because can you hear me? Hello, can you
Yes,
hear?
I can hear you
Okay,
just fine.
okay, great. Why am I asking about those operations? Because to me they are, even after all those years, even after tens of thousands of games that are out every year, uh, those mechanics still feel fresh and original until today. So my question is, where those ideas came from? Did you see something maybe similar, or how did you come to all those ideas?
Well, I'm not an expert on mechanics and other games. I just, as I mentioned earlier in the design process, I tried to look very hard at what I want to simulate, just why this step leads to this step, a plot, as it were. It's almost like a plot in a novel, a logically connected sequence of events. And so I want to make rules that motivate players or to command players to follow the same sort of sequence they would in real life. And I tried to figure out which uh, how to do that. And this is in BIOS Genesis. It was just the rules of biochemistry that were commanding the game pretty much. And but once you get into things like when humans are involved in BIOS Origins or Neanderthal, a story about how humans develop from animals. Now you have other sorts of things like opinions and religion and
Mm-hmm.
politics and ideals, ideologies that people are willing to die for, and that just need different sorts of mechanisms than the biochemistry of molecules trying to self-organize. So I I don't know if I really can give you an answer to your question, but the these are these are attempts to recreate the the actual situation. And so the main thing about trying to make a political game, for instance, is to have a theory of politics. What things work, what things don't
Mm-hmm.
work. You have to study history, try to see which nations did well, which nations didn't. I mean, this is a good book on the subject right here. It's called Why Nations Fail. And it just goes in, it catalogs throughout all history, from from prehistoric times, from Stone Age, from the cities of yore in Assyria and the like, to now, what we know about why things come apart and why some things persevere. And to do that, you have to have a theory. You have to have a theory
Mm-hmm.
why this happens. And once you have a theory, then you can start saying, um, well, this is what will work and this is what won't work. A big, any Civ player, civilization game player knows that Well, the Holy Grail is like getting an industrial revolution. Why? Because now you've
Mm-hmm.
got factories cranking out tanks and planes and stuff. And typically in a Civ game, this is what you want. You want to have all this war material to be able to conquer the world. Now, this is not my idea of a Civ game. And when I did my own BIOS Origins, I tried to invert this pyramid here and say, instead of putting the players in the shoes of an overlord, a Napoleon or a Hitler, who's trying to take over the world, this is kind of the ambition in every wannabe Napoleon game player. Yeah, I want bragging rights to say I conquered all my opponents. I made more tanks and guns or whatever than they did, or they also have a very paternalistic system in these Civ games, these top-down Civ games, whereby um, the king or emperor or dictator dictates what goes on. If he wants to invade a country, he orders his armies and they invade. If the
Mm-hmm.
people are getting bored, he creates coliseums, keep them entertained. If they're getting stupid, he creates the library. Everything he provides for his people. Whereas I wanted to see a vision of a game where the player role was the populace themselves, who are trying to keep an evil dictator from arising in the ranks and taking over everything. In fact, they lose not if they get invaded by a foreign country, but if they allow a Hitler or Ramses II to arise among them and take over, uh, commandeer the entire economy. So by inverting the player roles, I tried to come up with a new style of civilization game in my game BIOS Origins and in Arrival, which I'm working on now, and the like.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh, okay. Okay. I've tried to get back one more time to, or maybe two more questions about Pax Renaissance, um,
Of course.
because another question that strikes me is how did you manage to balance such a complex system? What was the balancing process like? Do you remember it, or?
Oh God, balance. Um, you know, normally in the design process, I totally ignore balance. Totally
Mm-hmm.
ignore it. At the very end, um, I attempt to do some balancing mechanisms, but by this time, it's very hard to get playtesters to play the whole game all the way to the end for balancing mechanisms. So balance is very, very difficult process for me, especially since I treat it so lightly. I I don't worry about balance at all until at the end I try to throw things in. Before that, the main thing is just a simulation. Am I simulating what I want? And if balance goes to hell, well, I'll fix that later. Now, a lot of my games have a lot of symmetry, although my recent games have been more and more asymmetrical. And by symmetry, I mean the players are somewhat equivalent. They'll have special abilities that aren't that powerful. This is the case in Pax Porfiriana, for instance, where everyone
Mm-hmm.
is a hacendado, a rich landowner, and you have different abilities, and some are American, some British, some Mexican, and they have different abilities as a result, but they're not that overwhelming. So everyone automatically has an equal um, an equal ability to win at the situation. And the PAX Renaissance is somewhat similar. You have significant advantages if you are closer to the source in the supply route, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the biggest difference between the players is where their initial concessions are located in the spice route from China. In Pax Hispanica, they also you start as a lad in the Caribbean as just a boy, maybe a cabin boy on a pirate ship or a merchant ship, and you as you grow to adulthood, you decide your career path, and you each of the players are different nationalities, but the nationalities aren't that important in the game. The only real significant nationality is Spain because it's Spanish Main and Spain owns everything. But the other usurping nations, like France and Britain and the like, and Courland, even Sweden, uh, are just all on equal ground as far as getting ahead in the game and in balance. Spain was a chief balance problem in Pax Hispanica because it starts with a huge advantage. Everything in the game is owned by Spain. And the only reason the other nations can get in is because Spain, by this time, is so corrupt that their governors are willing to trade with the other players on the side, unofficially, on the black market. So a lot of the PAX series balance is not a huge deal because it's more or less symmetrical. High Frontier is in the same
Mm-hmm.
vein. The different players have different abilities, but balance is not that critical. Um, Arrival has a lot more balance problems, and I'm going through a lot of issues on that. Some of the each of the players can be differing arrival species that have evolved in their century-long journey from the stars and emerge from the starship quite different. Some stay in the starship, some went to the surface. But so the any success that I have in balance was achieved by my indefatigable playtesting team that
Mm-hmm.
is willing to, like Mars, for instance, who's willing to keep playing the same game over and over again with all kinds of different iterations. And then they all yell at me how terrible the balance is, and I desperately try to fix it up. And so it's
Yeah.
not a very elegant answer, I'm afraid.
No, no, but it's an honest one, so I guess everyone appreciates it. So yeah, it's yours. It's yours. Those are your games and your answers. So one more question uh, about comparison between BIOS games and PAX games, PAX series, because uh, in my opinion, PAX games are much less random than BIOS games, especially
Yes,
when it comes to comparison with BIOS Genesis. Also in BIOS Megafauna in advanced game, we've got those events, and also in
yes,
Origins. Also, a lot of things happens. I really love this mechanic where icebergs might melt down, creating oceans and
yes,
destroying your cities. It's a it's a wonderful thing to of course in context of the game, to see how the map lives its own life, but still from the Euro game perspective, it's quite random. So my question is, why PAX games are much less random than BIOS games? What was the reason? From
I mentioned the Octobahn earlier, which is a roller coaster event. In the BIOS series, we're dealing with pretty long periods of time and natural events over long periods, climate change in general. In BIOS Megafauna, you have continental drift. So you've got the cratons, the continents splitting up, which might leave your a little boatload or island load of your animals isolated out in the ocean, and then it'll crash into another continent somewhere that's filled with just the wrong sorts of creatures that you're compatible with. And so there's uh, this sort of long-term climate um, change and climate disaster, the metronome of which disasters occur, is much more prevalent in BIOS games. And in the PAX games, I emphasize people's control over nature and over their own destiny and over their own lives. But in BIOS series, I emphasize the opposite, where the animals have to just hold on for dear life when they're riding the roller coaster, the Octobahn.
Mhm.
And now, all these games, as you know, I try to pander to those Euro gamers who don't like random elements by saying, okay, play the basic game with no events, and
Mhm.
you've got a game of chess. And so it's only for the advanced game where the continents crash together and the volcanoes blow up and asteroids hit the Earth, that always makes for a terrible day when, an
Mhm.
asteroid blows up half the planet. So
Okay. Okay, so move on from Pax Renaissance right now to maybe to High Frontier. But the question is, how do you feel? Do you still have you know enough
do I
enough?
still have the mental energy? Um, I I have to work tomorrow and it's starting to get a little bit late, but I'm still game for more questions, Peter.
Okay, so maybe let's do it like that. Maybe let's move on a little bit to the present, to Arrival. Let's talk a little bit about Arrival, and I hope
Okay.
that we'll be able to maybe talk one more time, at least one more time, because it's a real pleasure to talk with you, um,
Okay, well, thank you,
to
Peter.
listen to you.
So you're getting now to the ghost of Christmas present.
Present, yeah, exactly. So. mm a couple of questions about Arrival, as well as about your current approach to design. Um, so you have already t- told us about a little bit about what's the idea of the title of Arrival, and
Yes.
what is it about. Um, how does it differ from your previous, let's call them space projects?
Well, Arrival, just to repeat, is a story of a colonizing ship that's arrived at an alien world, actually two alien worlds. And you can sort of imagine the situation. This starship is rocket powered. It's needed mountain of very expensive fusion fuel to get this far to deliver basically a beach ball payload to this. And this is just the way that interstellar travel works as far as we know. There is no warp drives, there's no wormholes and
Yeah.
no Dean drives. So the only way to get to another star is by rocket travel or possibly sails. And it's going to take a century to get to the solar neighborhood. And it'll also take something, radiation hardened humans. And finally, it'll take um, extreme mass conservation measures. So the survival prospects of the team, of the crew, of the embryos that may have survived the radiation drenched journey is going to be pretty problematic. So Arrival has taken now 1.25 years of development, of really intense development. So it's taken a long time. Everything uh, is a huge problem there. It's not just studying up on what is known about exoplanets and what is known about terraforming and what is known about bioforming. These are all huge scientific problems in the game, but there's also the very contentious issue of utopia. What is You're starting a new society. What is a good society? What is a successful one? And there are regimes, as you know, in most PAX games, PAX Porfiriana being the most notable, with 4 regimes. And the situation in Arrival, the design decision in Arrival, is to place the players as artificial intelligences, each with a different programmed idea, programmed back on Sol, back on Earth, about what is a successful colony.
Hmm.
And these 3 are not incompatible, but of course, if you got limited, any economy has to figure out what's the most important, what's the least important, and dedicate itself to trying to maximize whatever utility function the AIs have been programmed with in order to justify this expensive journey, one-way journey to the stars.
Hmm.
And whatever it is, the colonists aren't going back. There is no going back. As I said, it took a mountain to get a beach ball. Until you can build up another mountain of helium-3 deuterium fuel, you're not going to be able to go back. So there's 3 regimes and there's 3 ideas on what constitutes a successful colony. One is oxygen. Oxygen track is basically to build an Earth 2. You want to terraform the planet, or at least build up oxygen levels so that life can thrive on it. Now, not only life, internal combustion engines. You can have automobiles and stuff like this on the planet. Oxygen is an Arrival not only good for or necessary for life, some oxygen cycle, not only for the incoming Arrival colonists, but also for any native species. Native species to the Arrival worlds will also breathe oxygen. And so this puts them into some sort of similar regime systems. So one of the regimes is making an Earth 2 with oxygen. Another one is coming up with exponential spread of humans and humanity's ideas throughout the galaxy, which will require each new colony to build new starships. So the second regime is a tech one. You want to have as many companies as possible able to build new starships and launch another. It's called Exodus. The starship's called Exodus, another mission to the stars to ensure that through redundancy and exponential spread, that humanity makes its mark in the galaxy, or at least our arm of the galaxy, or at least the solar neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And the third and last one is some sort of urban utopia whereby you have cities and highways and vehicle chains from the moons down to the trenches. And so Arrival is sort of a conflict between these ideas of what the planet should be. Should we terraform the planet so that it's perfect for us, or should we bioform ourselves so that we're perfect for the planet we got?
Mm-hmm.
And if there are living things on the planet, that's not necessarily true, but even if they're just microbes or
Mm-hmm.
algae nets or whatever, what sort of bioethics are there to doing things like, well, this world is really dry. It's drier than Arrakis in the Dune series.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to really make anything of ourselves here, it'll need water. We're going to have to drop a giant ice ball the size of Phobos on this planet
Are we able
and
to
to
do it
hydrate it,
in the
to
game?
give it oceans or lakes at least. And well, is this ethical? Something's already established itself. The species in Arrival are all temperature coded, and the temperature variations are huge. So it goes all the way from 2000 degrees Kelvin for in the deep trenches for ice 7 life, such as hypothetical life called fish-like life called sirens, who make a little bit of an appearance in High Frontier, all the way to outer space to about 70 or 50 degrees Kelvin. And these are all color coded, and the planet is cross-sectioned on its side, so you can see these levels: orbit, sky, ground, ocean, and trench levels that you can explore in it. So, at any rate, that's sort of the design problems faced by Arrival. There's ethics, there's politics, although politics has been relegated into just the advanced game for Module 1. But there is coalitions. There's a difference between volitionals, creatures that can consciously have a concept
Mm-hmm.
of themselves and time and space, and non-volitionals. Those animals, such as most of the animals on Earth today, from flatworms to zebras, that basically run on their Darwinian programming, though these tactics or intelligences that have served them to make it this far in their 4 billion journey of life on Earth, 4 billion year journey of life on Earth. um, Humans are notably different from the other animals in that they can write their own programming. They can make up their own mind. They can do things that no animal would do. And for instance, ignore their own survival or procreation imperatives in favor of other goals, other ideological goals, whatever those may be, peace, freedom, religion, whatever. No animal can act on anything other than its Darwinian imperative. So the life forms on arrival and the morality when dealing with them depend on whether or not it's volitional or not. This is another big design problem in the game.
It sounds great, but also very very ambitious. But it's
Yeah, yes, it's
it's
very ambitious, but and Marson has been one of the stalwart play testers who pretty much has shot down every idea. He reminds me of my son, because my son, I don't know if he's still listening or not. I hope not. But my son is
Here, I'm
one that
here.
what when I takes an idea to my son or something else like that and say, "All right, this is it. I think this will work." And what do you think? What do you think should be changed? Matthew will say, complete abandonment. Rip up the whole project. Don't even attempt to salvage anything. Just start over from a complete blank piece of paper. Maybe even abandon the concept. Matthew was notorious for this sort of savagery.
yeah, but
How many projects he like buried your projects?
Yeah, I can think of a couple right now. But there are some that he thought should be buried. God, which one was it that turned out to be successful eventually? Oh God, I can't remember it right now. But no, there's a few that he buried that haven't been revived. But I'll tell you a little tiny development story. I won't take up too much time on this, but it's just how Station Fall came to be. We worked, and he was still a pre-teenager then. He was probably only about 10 when we were trying to develop what would later become Station Fall, and it would be a game in which all the characters in this space station were player controlled, but there would be we had it so that there were 4 maps. Yeah, we had 4 maps of the space station, and these
Mhm.
4 maps were in separate rooms. And there would have to be a judge, a
Okay.
station master, who would go periodically to each of these 4 rooms, see where the players are, tell them what they saw and what they could do, and then go to the next room. And we ran this at conventions. It was called the Artifact, and it was pretty intense, but pretty impractical. And Matthew had the dream of trying to make it into a practical system whereby the players didn't know who the other players were or what their motives was. In the Artifact, the big thing was you could see, for instance, the space pirates, but you didn't know what they were, why they were on the ship. You saw the phone company repairing the lines, but you didn't know if they're the real phone company or if they were Pinkertons or if they were on the side, whose side they were on or what they were trying to do. So a lot of the chaos had to do with guessing the motives of the other players. If you read the rules, you knew the range of motives they could take on, but you had to guess by their actions which ones they actually were. And it was a lot of fun if you could pull it off. And Matthew, eventually he changed the location from a space station to a castle under siege with escape tunnels and things like this. But we had to go back to the station because the players, there had to be some reason, some Deus Ex Machina reason why the players could all communicate with each other all the time. You had to have
Mm-hmm.
phones, cell phones, handies, whatever that would be because they were constantly sending messages and the like. So, at any rate, I, I, I diverted a little bit more than I was supposed to on Station Fall, but that's a little bit how Matthew was able to develop an original idea into something more practical. And this is sort of like the evolution of Lord's games and the PAX games in general. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds good. Uh, okay, so a couple of questions about design philosophy and I guess we will end. So, your projects today, how how has your approach to the development designing of the game changed over the years? Have you thought about it?
yeah, well, I have thought about it. In fact, I teach a course on game development, design and development at Södertörn University here in Stockholm. Every year, I talk to the kids um, and try to instill in them the really fundamental principles, the basis for what is a game, what is not a game, what is logic, what is the purpose of a game, and what is art. I even go into art because I consider board game design to be an art form.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something, this theory, this course that I teach in game design at Södertörn has developed. I've been teaching it for 7 years now, and it's been something that I have developed over time. Uh, the ways to try to represent politics,
Mm,
the importance to have a philosophy, and an importance to try to exhibit your philosophy by or demonstrate your philosophy by your game. You exhibit something, you reveal something about yourself by what you choose as a game subject, by how you present the game, how you assign player roles. I define art in my course, I define art as the recreation of reality according to the artist's value judgments. So obviously, um, games fall into this category just as much as literature, another art form, making
mm-hmm.
novels or movie making, or even to some extent painting and music are all trying to demonstrate or reveal something about what you're passionate about by um, the genre, the art form that you choose. And of course, well, maybe not of course, but board game design as an art form is even more exacting, mathematically exacting than literature and painting and even music, in as much as every word, every grammar, everything in the rules has to be really, really clear so that everybody's playing the same game and nobody is, there's no misunderstandings, there's no contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, but the important part that I wanted to get to by giving you my definition of art was a value judgments. You have to have, first of all, you have to have values and you have to make judgments on them because you're going to reveal your value judgments in your game by what you, not only by what you're trying to simulate, but how you simulate it. And I especially in politics, when you have things like command economies versus decentralized capitalistic economies, which ones are better? Why do command economies, even though they're worse, they don't produce as much? How do they perpetuate themselves? How do centralized forces or governments grow, despite the fact that such growth detracts from ultimately from the productivity and prosperity of a nation? These sorts of value judgments will come out in your game
Mm-hmm.
in this regard. And so this is typically when I go into a game, I'll go into this subject just briefly, that I've discovered something about the universe through reading books, like the one I'm reading now about why nations fail. I discover something and I say, well, God, this will make a great game. This is something I want to explore. This is something I want to recreate and see if it works. If I do, if I put this theory into the game and players will use it, will they succeed? Will they um, or will they discover a different theory? My games, I try to make them sandbox enough so that you
Mm-hmm.
can experiment with different ways
Mm-hmm.
to victory, and you can try not only to learn something yourself about the world, but even to teach me and other onlookers something about the world, something not expected, because now I've given the basic rules about how things work, the process by how to make it work efficaciously, how to work in a desired way, um, might not be obvious until gamers figure it out. So
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of what I find interesting about game design, seeing how the players will react to it and figure things out about it. Of course, sometimes they figure things out that are obviously dysfunctional, and this means that you did you did something wrong. One of your processes has a loophole or isn't accurate or is just wrong from to beginning if you come out with nonsense at the end. And this has happened too. Or more typically, actually, especially in the high frontier design process, you cut corners. Say, I don't want to go into all this. I know it's not that reasonable. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'll put this in. And God, it comes back to bite you. The the players will leap on any weakness in the rules
Mm-hmm.
to come up with a very unreasonable, um, perfectly legal rules wise, but very unreasonable way to get to Uranus or to fly to the surface of the planet without using any fuel. So all kinds of irrational uh, results usually mean there's some mistake in the rules you made.
Yeah, yeah. Players like to exploit exploit those rules and
Yes,
those things. But that's how every game basically works. That's probably the difference between reality or
yes,
almost perfect simulation and the game with a rule
right.
set.
And I'll just repeat what I said before, that in the beginning, I was interested in just very tactical confrontations between humans. But then I began to get more and more interested in the lessons of history, big picture stuff. And so trying to accommodate that is how I came up with my theory in my course on game design.
Okay. The last question I would like to ask you is, what do you think about the role of interaction in strategy games? Uh, is it important? How much of interaction do you
Yeah,
like?
well, it's what I teach in my course is player interaction is really critical, and it's something that I ask the students to come up with their own game project. I only give them what 3 weeks. So they've taken a year and a quarter on arrival, and I asked them to come up with 3 weeks onto a game. And what the usual problem is not enough player interaction. It's multiplayer solitaire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the example I give is tennis versus bowling.
Mm-hmm.
In tennis, you have to react to what your opponent does, and you have to react to the strengths and weaknesses of your opponent in serving, in backhand, or whatever. But in bowling, you're faced with only the situation that you created yourself with your earlier round, and you try to do the best you can, and you really don't care about what your opponent is doing. Um, this is more or less multiplayer solitaire, and it's undesirable in a game in general, even though High Frontier in its later phases of the game is tending towards multiplayer solitaire. Uh, you you still have a market, and you still have races at the beginning, and you still have glory and things like this. But so I do have problems with multiplayer solitaire, but I have to have player interaction. Now, negotiations is a different question. Should players negotiate? How should negotiations be restricted by rules in the game? And what kind of negotiations are allowed? I've been experimenting with various ways to do this. Obviously, if it's a competitive game and you've got a low player count, negotiations aren't really going to be very effective because players will be so suspicious and so afraid that any negotiation will help their opponent that they break down almost immediately unless you have some really big incentive for it. Negotiations take time as well, a lot of time, and you want to try to them to be negotiating when it's not their turn, or
Mm-hmm.
when they don't have to decide what they're doing for their move, and things like this. But of course, negotiations are direct evidence of player interaction, which is always beneficial in a multiplayer game.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Phil. So I've got a lot more questions, but I do not want to exhaust you completely. Uh,
Okay.
so.
Well,
Mhm.
I hope that you have good feedback from this, and I'll be willing to have another session sometime. It's just I get tired and my voice starts to run dry after a while.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
it's natural, but thank you. I'm sure if you will be able to talk at least one more time, that then I would love to
Yes.
to talk
Well,
with you.
set something up with Marcin or with me directly, and I'll be glad to try to answer your remaining question.
Okay,
Now,
okay.
I'm
We still have like one full ghost, right?
At
So
least,
yes.
at least, at least.
Well, I'm going on my honeymoon in a week and a half,
Mm,
so yeah, it perhaps should be before then. But I also wanted to be sure and thank Marcin for making this interview possible.
yeah, definitely. Thank
thanks
you,
a
Marsh.
lot. Yeah, thanks a lot for agreeing to meet us and talk with us. Well,
All right.
especially with Piotr.
Yeah.
Okay. All
So
right.
so
Well,
thank you.
bye-bye from Stockholm.
Yeah, thank you very
Bye
much.
bye.
All the best, and see you again, and have a great time on your honeymoon.
Okay. You have a good time with your fellow gentlemen, okay, Peter?
Okay, thank you very much. So bye bye.
Bye
Okay.
bye.
Hey do, as they
Have a
say
good
in
night.
Sweden. Bye.
Bye.